So everyone's kind of freaking out about this corner crisis, and I would like to talk about it. So what we lost was Waynes and Rhodes. Who we still have are Hughes, Hill, Boyd, and some other guys who haven't played yet, and that it would be Marcus Sales, Mark Fields, and Keeman Hall. So, what we lost in Waynes, he was targeted 96 times, completed a lot, 71 of those were completed for 74%, 719 yards, and 5 touchdowns, and allowed a 107 quarterback rating. Xavier Rhodes, 81 targets for 66 catches, which is 81.5%. He allowed 791 yards and 4 scores, and allowed 123 rating. So Hughes, the other most targeted corner still on the roster, you have 9 pass deflections. He was targeted 67 times. 41 of those were completed, 61.2%. 7.2 yards per target. He allowed 3 scores and allowed a 91.9 quarterback rating coming off of an ACL. So usually what happens with those is you have a kind of a down year after you have a torn ACL. It kind of takes a year and a half-ish to kind of come back from the ACL. And so that was kind of the bad year for it. Holden Hill, the other talented corner Minnesota has that's young, he was suspended for half the year. He had 1 pass deflection. He was only targeted 9 times. He allowed 6 catches, 66.7%. 7.8 yards a target, didn't allow a score, and a 90 quarterback rating. But in 2018, he was showing a lot more promise, and I imagine a lot of what happened there was, he missed half the year, so kind of probably just fell out of swing of things. And, next year he shouldn't have that problem. Chris Boyd is the other one that would get targets. 1 pass deflection, 13 targets, 9 catches, 69.2%, 7.2 yards a target, didn't allow a score, 89.6 quarterback rating, which once again, 96 targets for Waynes, allowed 71, 74%, 719 yards, and 5 scores with 107 quarterback rating. Rhodes, 81 targets, 66 receptions allowed, 81.5% for 791 yards and 4 scores, 123 quarterback rating allowed. So put that together, they were targeted, just Waynes and Rhodes, they were each combined targeted 177 times, allowed 137 catches for 77.4%, allowing 9 scores and 1,510 yards. That is between 2 people. And when you go into the grand scheme of things, there were 601 total attempts against the Vikings defense, 394 of them allowed, so 65.5%, 3,737 yards, and 23 total touchdowns. So, if you want to get into this, in terms of total completions and targets, Waynes and Rhodes were 29% of the total targets, and 35% of their total completions allowed, 40% of all of their yards allowed through the air, and 39% of all of their touchdowns allowed. And if you were to take their just targets and completions away from the defense as a whole, it's 424 targets, 257 completions for a solid 60%. And so the average corner on our roster, not named Waynes or Rhodes, was actually allowing, he had 34 targets for 22 completions, allowing 64%, around 227 yards and 2 scores. I rounded up. Some of them were kind of weird numbers, but they were close enough to round up. So that's just the corners, though. So that was in total all those percentages. If we go into total cornerback targets, there was 313 cornerback targets, 224 of those completed for 71.6% total, 2,419 yards and 16 scores. Now, Waynes and Rhodes, if you want to break this down into percentages, they were 56.5% of their targets, they were 61% of their completions, and 62.4% of their yardage allowed from just the cornerback targets. And among the 16 touchdowns scored, 56.2% of them were given up by either Trey Waynes or Xavier Rhodes. So, everyone calling it Armageddon because we lost 2 starting corners on the outside, it's really not. These two were possibly 2 of the most replaceable players on this entire team from last season. So, the way I look at this is losing Mackenzie Alexander was the real problem here. He had 5 pass deflections, 58 targets, 38 receptions allowed, 65.5%. He allowed 5.6 yards a target, 324 yards, 2 scores, and an 84.3 quarterback rating. Very, very solid. So, and the nickel for Mike Zimmer is kind of weird, because if you were to watch it, they kind of give up the inside, which is typically not what you want to do, because that's kind of going against it, but he likes to create bracket coverages with his linebackers, so he typically just kind of gives them the inside, gives them to his athletic linebackers, and then he kind of, protects the outside and the fades, things of that sort. And which is one way to go about it. It's just really weird. And it's hard to retrain another veteran nickelback or even get a rookie in there and just expect him to do it, because even if he has played nickel before, he hasn't played Zimmer's nickel, which is entirely different from, other nickels. So losing Mackenzie Alexander is the biggest problem, but people claiming it's Armageddon because we lost, our top 2 corners. Our top 2 corners had to go anyway. So I don't think anybody here would actually look at those numbers by Trey Waynes and say, oh, $14 million a year? Sign me up. That's what he's worth. I just think that's kind of why Cincinnati might be in where they are right now, because they make choices like paying Trey Waynes. Although Trey Waynes has been, maybe not a liability, but not a strength necessarily up until last season, where he was a major liability. Just no one really talked about him because, well, Xavier Rhodes was so much worse. He covered up the fact that Trey Waynes was also kind of not playing well at all either. So I think the cornerback crisis may have been last season. We just don't know the names of these guys yet, because this is more of a changing of the guard in the secondary, because they're all getting old so they can't keep up. And Hughes is another first-round pick. There was hope in Holton Hill. He is a player. He just had the marijuana problems, and now that's no longer being suspended for. So for the most part, you'll have Holton Hill. Holton Hill will be there. Holton Hill went undrafted due to marijuana. Holton Hill probably should have been a second-day draft pick. They still have talent. They need to add to it, obviously, but I don't think it's necessarily Armageddon in the secondary because of who they lost. They really only need to replace Mackenzie Alexander, and they might already have that in-house in Mike Hughes, even though I think we should keep him on the outside just because of how weird the nickel is. But once again, you're going to have someone new in the nickel regardless, because Mackenzie Alexander ain't coming back. So that's kind of my thought on this, because I don't think, I think a lot of the change here is actually going to result in a better product on the field, especially on the outside corner spots, because of how bad Waynes and Rhodes were. We can roll out what we have right now, and the outside corners likely perform, over a 16-game season, better than Trey Waynes and Xavier Rhodes. So, at least the 2019 versions of them anyway. So, to me, this is a very easy thing to let go of, because we kind of already knew there was going to be a lot of changes to this defense just because it is getting older. So as they get older, do you really want to continue to pay them as much as they're paid? Because they're paid very handsomely to, be declining. And we already got one replacement in Michael Pierce. They've yet to replace any of their corners, but it'll be interesting to see if they add veteran outside corner help or veteran inside nickel corner help. and see which ones they draft, because I do think there's a belief in the talent of Holton Hill. I don't know if they necessarily trust him yet, but so I doubt they give him a job right away, but I feel like Hughes is penciled in somewhere in the starting lineup. We just have to wait and see what that is. I just really don't think the sky is falling. It's just getting younger. And so you get rid of names that aren't producing anymore, but names involve people freaking out when they are left. And I understand experience is a thing, but when that experience is allowing, more than half of your yards, you probably need to get rid of that experience. And because it's probably not a good one, and we kind of learned from last year, not a good one. So I would like to know your guys' comments and opinions into the comments below. Like and subscribing, always good. And until next time, I bid y'all adieu.